I'm so sorry. My voice doesn't carry in these settings. So, welcome to our Theology on Tap. It's the first one of 2025. It's so good to see y'all. Have anyone in here not been here before? Have been to the Newman Center yet? Not been here, sorry. Welcome. So this Newman Center, we serve Pasadena City College, Caltech, and the Fuller Seminary. So we have a lot of students and young adults here. The Archdiocese of Los Angeles helps us with this event, and so their Young Adult Ministry Division is a co-sponsor, kind of this Theology on Taps. We usually do about 4 a year, so you can always be on the lookout for the next one coming up. The next one we have is actually in June, and it's going to have a Eucharistic theme, and it's going to be Father Matt Wheeler. So I'll let you know what that is. If you don't receive our emails, you can actually sign up for our emails on the spreadsheet over there. On the tall table when you first walk into the Newman Center. So just a little housekeeping. If you don't know where the restrooms are, they're right there on the way to the stairs on the right on this side. And I'm so happy to welcome Father Robert Spitzer. Many of you maybe have seen him before. He's I think been here 4 times maybe. I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times. So if you don't know Father Robert Spitzer, he is the president of the Magis Center of Reason and Faith and the Napa Institute. He's the author of many books, which maybe some of you have already read and know about. And he's here today with us from Orange County. So welcome.
I really appreciate that, Kristen. Thank you for all the hospitality, Alma. Thank you. The book I'm referring to tonight is this one. I didn't bring any of them, of course, but it's called Christ, Science, and Reason, and it's chapter 3 on the Shroud of Turin. If you're interested in that sort of thing, with lots of footnotes, you're certainly welcome to get one from Amazon. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Dear Father, we ask you to bless us this day. Give us a great insight through your Holy Spirit into the Holy Shroud, your Son. I certainly believe that it was. And dear Lord, please tell us through it about your passion as we enter into this Holy Week, about your resurrection as we enter into the season of Easter. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. And Mary, seat of wisdom, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Just a brief intro on the actual relic of the Shroud of Turin. The shroud is kept in Turin, Italy, as you suspect from the name. It is a linen cloth, a very expensively woven linen cloth that is 14 feet long, 3.5 feet wide. On the cloth is emblazoned basically a photographic negative, and I'll get to this in a moment, a photographic negative figure of a man crucified in the unique way of Jesus. There are 2 separate kinds of imaging on the shroud. The first is the actual image itself. That's, of course, you'll see in a moment. You're probably looking right at the face of Jesus right now. That positive image that you're seeing, that image is looking at a photographic negative of what you really see on the shroud. If you go down to the actual slide of the shroud, you can see that it's just like, it looks like a photographic negative. It almost looks shadowy. It's got a straw-like coloration on it. But it turns out, as we shall see, it is a perfect 3-dimensional, I'll talk about the 3-dimensional imaging in a moment, 3-dimensional image, both the inside and the outside. So you can see the interior backbone of the man. You can see the bones and the flesh, the layers of flesh, that are surrounding it, the musculature and the skin, etc., around the backbone. So it's a 3-dimensional image, a perfect 3-dimensional photographic negative image of both the inside and the outside of this man, and blazoned on a non-photographically sensitive linen cloth. So this is a strange one. As we'll be talking about in a moment, radiation is the only way this image could have gotten on the shroud. But I'm getting way ahead of myself here. but just keep this in mind. This doesn't come from any substance at all. It is not a powder or a dye or a rub, excuse me, or a liquid or anything of that nature. This is basically a coloration, a photographic negative, three-dimensional coloration that is so precisely embedded on the uppermost surface of the fibrils of this shroud that it is very much like an MRI, three-dimensional imaging, and I'll get to it in a moment. The only possible way of rendering this is radiation. But it's got to be a radiation that can give us imaging on the inside of the body. And that's what's going to be our final clue as to what happened. But I'll just hold it on there. So we don't have a substance producing the image. The image is literally embedded in the uppermost surface of the fibrils of the cloth, never penetrates to the inside of the fibers of the fibrils, never penetrates to the inside of the cloth. So we can also see that there's blood on the shroud, and we'll talk about that in a moment. There's 372 blood stains there. And make no mistake about it, this is real blood, as we shall see in a moment. It has, of course, AB blood type, human immunoglobulins, human hemoglobin, human whole blood, human bilirubin, etc. So these are blood stains. They're certainly not paint or some red substance or ochre or anything. Obviously the ridiculous conjectures that were disproven way back in 1930s that could tell very much that these are real blood stains. And we owe the technology that actually analyzed the blood is in much more detail. I have that in the book. I do not have it in the, I'm not going to go through it in detail tonight, but you get the sense. It's blood, 372 blood stains. And it tells the story of a unique crucifixion, the whole history of crucifixions. We only have one that is this kind of crucifixion that we'll be talking about: a crown of thorns, a spear in the side, etc. Three other things to just recognize really quickly about it. The first thing is that, as we'll talk about again, it's anatomically perfect. So there's no anatomical flaws here. This has been examined by at least 20 histopathologists, medical specialists, forensic specialists, etc. There's just no anatomical imperfections in the body of the image of this cloth, the negative image of the body that's emblazoned on the cloth, but we can see it, as you can see from that face picture or the full body picture, that's the photographic negative, which is really the positive image that's there. There's no anatomical imperfections. There's nothing wrong. A medieval forger, no possible way could they have made an image with this kind of anatomical specialization and perfection. Look at the paintings in the Middle Ages. I have nothing against the paintings in the Middle Ages. They're wonderful paintings, but they're not anatomically perfect by any stretch of the imagination. This is so far beyond the capacities of medieval forgery, and on about 20 different levels, and we'll talk about that by the end of the talk. But for the time being, you get the point. There's a second thing that's really important about the blood. And that blood came on the shroud before the image. So if a forger did it, then he placed 372 blood stains, anatomically perfect selection of the spots for the blood, given the wounds, the underlying wounds, and he did it without an image, and then put the image on the cloth afterwards? I don't think so. And we'll see in a moment why the carbon dating was wrong. But for the time being, know this. This cloth is one big enigma. In fact, there's 46 enigmas on the cloth. And the hypothesis that I'm about to talk about tonight explains all 46 of these enigmas, and I think it was a very good hypothesis. But you get the general view on the cloth. I obviously believe it is the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. I think, you know, in science, you're never 100% sure of anything. But I'm 99.9% sure of it. You know, I'm very, very secure in this, and I have to allow, you know, that something could be discovered in the future that could throw everything up. But I don't think so. I mean, this thing has been examined, and we'll talk about 4 different ways of proving the particle radiation hypothesis as the origin of the image later. But these would be, you know, remnants on the cloth that could reveal these things. But I'm getting ahead of this. Everybody okay on a general description there of the shroud? Good?
Yes.
All right. So let's go, you know, right away to, of course, the elephant in the middle of the room, the 1988 carbon dating. How in the world could a cloth with this kind of pedigree get a carbon dating that basically dates the shroud to about 700 years ago, between 1250 and 1370 AD? How in the world did that carbon dating, how could it be so errant? You know, and by the way, we're going to talk about a face cloth of Oviedo. This is a face cloth that was put around the face, I'm going to say, of Jesus. And it is stored in Oviedo, Spain. And we're going to talk about it at the end of this talk. But it was used to transport the body from the cross down to the tomb, removed from the man's face when it got to the tomb so that the man could be put into the shroud. Of course, I believe it's Jesus as the man who's put into the shroud. And when we see the 120 points of congruence between the face cloth of Oviedo, you know, and the Shroud of Turin's face, you can see right away, you know, with this, you know, congruence, it's very clear that these 2 cloths had to touch the same face. So, but it's very interesting. And is it the real face cloth of Jesus? It is. The dating, the carbon dating on that face cloth of Oviedo is 700 AD. Another. Can it all be explained? It can all be explained. One word that will give us many of the explanations, those of you in physics will love this, neutrons. Neutrons are the explanation for all of these strange kinds of coincidences. But I've gotten ahead of myself once again. Let's just start then with the carbon dating. We get this errant, well, we seem to have a carbon dating that seems to show unqualifiedly that the shroud, and by the way, these are reputable labs that are doing this carbon dating. And furthermore, you know, the sample, it was a very small 8-centimeter sample that was taken from the edge of the shroud on the right of the shroud, and it's in the foot area, and it extends out to the edge there, and you can see that it comes from the edge 8 centimeters over closer to the body and stops. I will talk about the edge of that sample that's closest to the edge of the shroud, furthest from the body. Just hold on to this, is 1155. And then as you move 8 centimeters over closer to the body, it turns into 1410. And you say, wow, that's a 250-year variance in an 8-centimeter piece of cloth. Something very, very strange going on here. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. There is something strange, something anomalous, something that should have been caught by the peer reviewers for Nature magazine, Nature Journal, but they didn't catch it, or they turned a blank eye to it. But those of you who like statistics, hey, that's just about 3 standard deviations off the mean in an 8-centimeter sample. This reeks of inaccuracy from the very beginning. But there's just a clue. Let's just go through it. You're going to see an explanation for this. I think that will, you know, help you to realize why the consensus of physicists are now very sure that particle radiation is the explanation for the image. But again, let me just hold on. Let's just take a look at, you know, this 1988 carbon dating came about, and Dr. Tristan Casabianca and his team, they basically published this in Oxford's big archaeology journal called Archaeometry. And Tristan Casabianca basically said there's too much heterogeneity, too much stratification in this sample. So when you see that you have a 250-year variance in a 8 centimeter cloth, so about 31 years per centimeter, I think it's 91 years per inch, right 2.5 inches in that cloth. You look at that and you go, there's something wrong. And Casabianca and his team actually did a statistical analysis of the raw data there and actually showed it was 3 standard deviations off the mean. And Mike's just going to read really quickly, the quote, a couple of the quotes that Casabianca indicated.
Tristan Casabianca et al., along with Professor Paola Pizzaro, a physicist at ENEA of Pisati, Professor Marinelli, laureate in natural and earth sciences, says, quote, the selected sample, chosen only from one point of the lineage, very contaminated and ended, do not represent the entire block, close quote. Torrisi and Carnagallo underline strong heterogeneity between the 3 laboratories and inside the laboratories as alarms of representativeness, sorry, it's like a tongue twister,
Yeah.
from a statistical point of view of the textile samples.
Okay, so there is the the shot across the bow. So Casabianca actually waited 29 years between 1988, right, and he's got to wait all the way until 2017 to finally. I mean, the guy's pounding on the door of the British Museum to say, please, just give us the raw data from that carbon dating. That's all we want. The British Museum would not release it for 29 years. Finally, they sued the British Museum under Freedom of Information Act and finally got it released. And of course, the heterogeneity, as you can see, that it's not just from the 3 different laboratories, but when you put together each sample that was, so the furthest edge was given maybe to Oxford, and the closest one to the body was given to Los Alamos, etc. But when you put all those things together, and even within the samples themselves, there's just too much heterogeneity for it to point to not just the Middle Ages, but to any age. I mean, this is a flawed sample, and 3 standard deviations within from the mean within 1 8 centimeter sample. That automatically is an alarm bell, as Casabianca says. It automatically pretty much indicates that you have a problem, and what's a glaring problem in the carbon dating. There's something that's throwing the dating off categorically. And as I said, the problem is neutrons. Okay, but let's take a look at some other reasons why, besides Casabianca's analysis, that shows that carbon dating just couldn't be the case. Since I'm just going to skip for a second. I'm going to skip the neutrons. I'm going to come back to the neutrons when we talk about the formation of the image, the miraculous formation of the image a little bit later. But right now, let's just zoom over and just talk about 5 other dating tests that have been done. We have a wide-angle X-ray scattering test that was done by Liberato Riccardo and his team over at the Italian National Labs and over at the University of Frascati and the University of Perugia. And so these guys basically did this wide-angle X-ray scattering test. It is non-carbon based, and that's going to be very important here. That you're going to have a non-carbon based dating test, and that test, which is a peer-reviewed, excellent dating test, dates the Shroud to between 55 to 74 AD, plus or minus whatever it was, 100 years, with a 95% certitude level. So I would say right there, you've got a real tension Three other tests were done by Giulio Fanti, and I think it was at Frascati at the time that he did it, the University of Frascati at the time, and the Italian National Labs there in Frascati. And he did a Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, a Raman laser spectroscopy, and mechanical compressibility and tension test. If you weight all of those things and take the straight mean of the means of all three tests, Fanti gets from all of them, and by the way, with varying sensitivities to carbon-14. The Raman laser has the least amount of sensitivity to carbon-14. The Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, a little bit more, but the point is it averages out to 90 AD. So you've got one wide-angle scattering test. Is where the median, right, probably about 64 AD, within spitting distance of Jesus' crucifixion, resurrection, and then you have the weighted averages of all three of the other tests, 90 AD. We're talking mid-first century AD as the very probable date based on non-carbon-based date. We'll see that carbon is going to be the problem. It's really the fly in the ointment here, and that's because nitrogen 14 in cellulose and linen is very sensitive to neutrons, which of course N14 plus a neutron yields C14 plus a proton. I don't have to tell you, C14 is what's measured in the carbon-14 dating test. If you can get an abundance of carbon-14 simply because of neutron fluids that's coming out of the body, then you're going to have a whole lot of extra C14 embedded in that clock. And it'll be embedded very, very systematically and mathematically in that cloth. And we're going to talk about the coincidences here, not only with the sample, but predicted coincidences for the next exhibition of the Shroud that'll probably prove that this neutron fluence is there. But for the moment, just know this. It's very likely that these non-carbon-based dating tests are right on the money. We have other dating tests too that are really important, but the one thing I'm just going to point out are two things. Let's just zoom for a second to the pollen grains embedded on the Shroud. Dr. Max Frey and his colleagues, he's a Swiss botanist and criminologist, and Dr. Marinelli, who is she's an earth scientist, but also a pollen specialist. The two of them have done immensely important work on the identification of pollen groups. Let me just get to the cut to the chase. What's so special about this? Number one, what we can see in the pollen grains is a proliferation, 75% of them. 3/4 of the pollen grains on the Shroud come from where? Jerusalem and northern Judea. Now just think about that for one moment. 3/4 of them. 11 of those pollen grains are indigenous to that region, and 4 of those pollen grains have never been found anywhere outside of Jerusalem and northern Judea except on the Shroud of Turin. Hey, I think we can make a reasonable and responsible conclusion that the Shroud was in Jerusalem/northern Judea for several centuries in the open air, accumulating all kinds of pollen grains indigenous to that region. It's stated outright, that's there. Now, let's think about this, good Caltech people. And you think, well, we know where the Shroud was. Remember, the carbon dating dates the Shroud to 700 years ago, basically. But we know where the Shroud has been. We have a strict provenance that we can follow in historical records, right in the Vatican, right in the various, the houses of Savoy, houses of Chambéry in France, and so forth and so on. So we can trace all of this. We know where it was. Last 700 years, the shroud was in Liry, France. That's where it was discovered by Geoffroy de Chardin in the mid-1300s. We know that it goes, by the 1500s, it goes to Chambéry, France, and then we know that it goes ultimately to Turin, Italy, where it's still residing today. So you would expect if the shroud is only 700 years old, as the carbon dating dated it, you'd only have, or the vast, like 96% of all the pollen grains in that shroud should be from where? Liry, France, Chambéry, France, and Turin, Italy. But 75% of the pollen grains are from Jerusalem in northern Judea. And there's another almost 11% that comes from Edessa, Turkey. So it had to be in Edessa, Turkey for a long time too. And then we get another, whatever it is, percentage. The least percentage on the shroud of pollen grains that we have is from France and Italy. We are the greatest percentage by far, Jerusalem, northern Judea. Second, Edessa, Turkey. Third, Constantinople, Turkey. Then, last but not least, France. So, no way could the shroud be 700 years old. I mean, did the medieval forger, did he know all of those unique and indigenous pollen grains that came from northern Judea and Jerusalem and scatter them profusely onto the shroud of Turin? I think not. If that's the case, skip the 700-year deal. There's something wrong, as we shall see. There is basically a categorical error. That means an error throughout the entire carbon dating that we'll talk about that is produced by nature. But how should I summarize it? I think it is reasonable and responsible to conclude that the shroud originated in Jerusalem and northern Judea in that era. It did so in the mid-1st century, as shown by 4 other dating tests that are non-carbon 14 based. And we'll see the significance of the non-carbon 14 based in just a moment. One last thing that's really important, and we'll talk about this when we get to the face called the Oviedo later. Are you guys hanging in there? Yeah. So, one last thing that we got to get to, and that is we have a strict historical provenance of the face cloth of Oviedo that goes back to 616 AD. So when it gets into the hands of Bishop Pelagius, he takes that cloth, he records the whole thing, what it looks like, etc., etc. We can see that the face cloth of Oviedo starts there. We can see that it goes on a journey. Not the same as the Shroud of Turin. Yes, it stayed in Judea and northern, the most prolific number of pollen grains on the face cloth of Oviedo is definitely Jerusalem, northern Judea. Then the next largest number is northern Africa, so we can see that it's moving toward North Africa. Finally, it goes up to Seville, Spain, then to Toledo, Spain, and then finally Oviedo, where it winds up being installed in a little bronze casket in the Cathedral of Oviedo, Spain, by Isidore of Seville in the mid-700s, and that's where it stays until this day. So we know that the face cloth of Oviedo definitely goes back to 616 AD or before, and that's really important, or before. Now, here's the rub, you guys, and we'll talk about it again. The face cloth of Oviedo and the Shroud of Turin, the face cloth of Oviedo does not have an image on it, like the Shroud, but it does have bloodstains on it, and it does have pleural edema fluid on it. So, right, pleural fluid is the coming from, the sac surrounding the lungs. It normally, after death, if I might use the very crude images, it starts coming out of the dead person's mouth and through the nose and down, into through the nasal cavity. And so these pleural edema fluid stains, they're kind of random, right? It's how you shape the body and how the body is, being moved around as it's being transported from the across down to the tomb. So you can see that, the blood stains, you can see where they are. You can see the patterns that come from the crown of thorns and so forth. You can see pretty clearly that they're gonna. You see where the central wounds are from the thorns that are penetrating the flesh and so forth, and the pleural edema that's coming out of the nose and so forth. But a lot of it is kind of randomized in the way that it kind of is moved around in the face. Now you take a digital overlay analysis, right? So you take a picture, a really solid, good picture of the face cloth of Oviedo without the image, and you then take the shroud and you position it so that it's oriented in the same way that the face cloth is oriented. You superimpose those two photographs on top of each other. There's 120 points of congruence. You know, 120 points of congruence and kind of randomized blood stains and pleural edema blood stains? Are you kidding me? Those two cloths touched the same bloody, crucified face. The odds against this happening by pure chance are astronomical. They touch the same face. But wait a minute. The face cloth of Oviedo goes back to 616 AD. If the shroud touched the same bloody crucified face, then it too must go back to 616 AD. So I think the evidence right now is overwhelming that the carbon-14 dating had a systematic error. And I'll describe the systematic error. The origin of the systematic error is the neutrons that are emanating from the body at the moment of the resurrection. Just hold on to the end of the time. So far, you guys okay?
Yes.
Jerusalem, northern Judea, that's a very probable place of origin. I'm quite sure. So I think we have to put the systematic error, the 3 standard deviations from the mean, we've got to push it aside a little bit because, and then explain why it happened. We must do that. But at the end of the day, I think with the other dating tests, we have reasonable security that it comes from the mid-1st century in Jerusalem, northern Judea. And I'm going to say that the face cloth of Oviedo is also the face cloth that was used to transport Jesus. Remember in John 20, remember when John and Peter are zooming off to the tomb? Remember? And then as they go over to the tomb, right, obviously the younger one, John, he gets there first. The beloved disciple gets here first. Then Peter gets in, shoves him out of the way. Literally, he comes rolling up after, shoves him out of the way, and he looks in and he says, he saw and he believed. Why? He saw the big cloth, right, lying, on the slab inside the tomb, and then it says he saw also the face cloth rolled up in a place by itself. So I think that face cloth, which the beloved disciple reports that he saw, I think it was in the tomb exactly as he saw it, and I think it is the face cloth of Oviedo. And ironically, the errant nature of the carbon dating will give us significant evidence for that fact. So hold on. We're going to go right back in a time machine, right back into history here, because this is a very, very fascinating set of circumstances. But let's turn to our Holy Week that's coming up for our, we've already celebrated the Passion Sunday Mass, and you're going to go to the Good Friday ceremony. But the main thing to remember in the Passion thing, let's go through the 372 blood stains, right? As I said, it's got all the features of blood, none of the features of paints, rubs, dyes, vapors, etc. It's got the AB blood type, the human hemoglobin, the human immunoglobulin, the human whole blood, the human bilirubin, etc., etc. So it is blood and none other than blood. It's human blood. It's AB, by the way, which is the rarest blood type in human typing, right? So AB blood type, I think it's 4% of the population, something like that. So essentially, by the way, it just happens to be, as you remember from my last talk, it's the same blood type as the Eucharistic miracles. So let's just say that this is blood, and I think it's reasonable and responsible to conclude and then it is the blood in a moment of the crucified Lamb. Let's take a look at the correlations. As I said, there's a lot of correlations between Jesus' crucifixion. Jesus' crucifixion, you can see throughout. Number one, Roman weaponry is everywhere present. Secondly, Jesus' crucifixion is unique in three respects. I'll talk about it, from the crown of thorns to the spear wound, etc. We'll talk about it in just a minute. As you can see, this man was emblazoned with perfect anatomical precision, emblazoned in the bloodstains over against the image on this shroud. You can see the unique crucifixion of Jesus writ large in anatomical language. Let's start with the crown of thorns. We have only one crucifixion in the whole history of crucifixions where a man was crowned with thorns. In the case of Jesus, it makes sense. He claimed to be king of the Jews. They wanted to make fun of him and so forth. You can see that the crown of thorns definitely makes sense in that context, probably explaining why this is the only one in history that we have. This man in the shroud was crowned with thorns, all right. And two things to take note of. The first thing is this crown is not a circlet crown like you would get in medieval times, or even Roman crowns that have a circlet. This is a Syrian crown with a top. The Syrian crowns, right, the ones that come from the Middle Eastern region here, they're like a helmet. They have a top on it. They're not a circlet like we have in the more quote-unquote civilized places of Rome in the Middle Ages. So this man is wearing a helmet crown, something that looks Middle Eastern, comes from the Syrian region. Notice also the thorns that are used. These are thorns which have a very thick base, and they come out and they curve around like that. And so the point, which is a very fine point, goes right into not just the scalp, but penetrates the scalp and is digging into the skull. So it's producing right, there's nerves all down this section here, right, of the skull. I don't have to tell anybody who's gotten hit in the head, and right, it bleeds so profusely, it just, you get to the point that, hey, this is a sensitive area. So again, those thorns were designed to really make it hurt, and they were pushed into the man's head very deliberately. But now today, we call this a Syrian Christ thorn. And the reason is the thorns on this crown, they resemble the Syrian thorn, the one that is, indigenous to the region, the one that is most prolific in the region of Jerusalem, northern Judea, and Syria. That's the thorn that was used. Not the thorns that are prolific in Rome or in some other, Italian or French area that doesn't have really a thorn that looks like this at all. It's definitely a Syrian Christ thorn, but it's prolific in Jerusalem, northern Judea. I'll just say, interesting coincidence. Number two, there is a wound, a spear wound in the man's side. If you look at it closely, you can see that it's going up between the 5th and the 6th ribs, right? So at the shaping of the ribs is going to force that spear, which you can see is a legionary spear, right, with the rounded head that's designed for thrust and removal. You can see that the ribs are going to force it up around a 30-degree angle into the thoracic cavity, going in at the right side, and it's going to kind of angle left, right, toward heart's a little off center, right? And so it's going to angle left, and it's going to nick the heart. And when it nicks the heart, blood's going to squirt out, if I might use the colloquial. And it will be very obvious when it squirts out that wound that's blood. It's red. And then it's going to keep going up, though, from the thoracic cavity, nicking the heart. It's going to go up into the pleural cavity, right? And remember, the pleural cavity surrounding the lungs is filled with that pleural fluid, right? And that pleural fluid is going to be under super high pressure. Remember, in a crucifixion, the person has to pull themselves up, right? So that you can't breathe, right? Your diaphragm has no, a room, to sort of expand and contract and expand and contract. Only way you can contract it so you can breathe again to expand it is pulling yourself up. An ingenious method of torture. But when you keep doing that, that pleural cavity, that pleural sac is going to fill with that pleural fluid under super high pressure. So as the spear goes up into the thoracic cavity, nicks the heart, and then goes into the pleural sac, it's going to skim the pleural fluid, which is transparent. Important to remember, that transparent fluid under high pressure, it's going to squirt out right behind the blood. So you should see on the man's wound on his side, you should see the center of it from the blood that comes out first. You'll see the center that is of it should be blood nearest the wound, and then you should see pleural fluid that goes over the blood, but is also this transparent fluid. It's also going to be around the blood, so it's going to just travel over the blood. It's not as viscous as blood. Viscous as blood, so it's just going to travel around and go around the periphery of the blood. This is exactly what you see in that spear wound on the man in the shroud. I mean, by the way, John's gospel again. When the legionnaire, what does John say? When the legionnaire thrust the spear into the man's side, out flowed blood and water. Yep, he didn't know that was pleural fluid. It's a very transparent fluid. Looks like water, but it's not water. But obviously he mistakes it for water, and he's reporting it as best he can. But there's the evidence right there on the shroud. There's the blood in the center, the pleural fluid across the blood and around the periphery, beyond it, and so you can see it resembles exactly what would have happened. Dr. Frederick Zugabe, histopathologist, one of the finest histopathologists at Columbia University and New York University, he made the study of this, and he did it again and again and again and again. This is the very likely scene of what happened to that man who is inside of that shroud, which is very similar to the way the beloved disciple reports it in the Gospel of John. Hanging in still? Okay, number 3. Third thing that's really interesting is, let's just call it the whipping, the very, torturous whipping of the man. You can see that there are, the man was whipped 39 times. So there's a legionnaire to his left, a legionnaire to the right, and you can see that they're alternatively whipping him, right? The guy on the left's a little shorter than the guy on the right. But essentially, they're whipping him with not a medieval whip that has one strand. He's one strap. He's whipping him with a Roman flagrum, which has 3 straps with lead dumbbells or bone chips at the end of the whip. So that these bone chips or the lead dumbbell, right, it's zooming up, into the side of the man. And then when the legionnaires pull it out, they just yank it out toward the body so that those bone chips or dumbbells just keep ripping the flesh across the back, right? So, I mean, basically it is shredding his flesh. And it's shredding it so much that the man is losing a lot of blood. And by the way, the reason why Jesus dies after 3 hours on the cross, it's pretty evident from the shroud. This guy would have lost so much blood. It's a miracle he made it up to Calvary. It's a miracle he made it 3 hours after he made it up to Calvary. You could see from the physique of the guy, he was one strong guy. He's tall, he's over 5'10", which for a Semitic man in the first century, that's tall. And on top of that, he is very strong, very muscular. So he's in good shape, he's got good musculature, but still, with that kind of blood loss, how much can you take? and of course limited amount, right? So the idea you can see from that 39 39 stripes times 3 stripes for 3 straps for whipping. You got a lot of blood loss going on there, and it's just draining right off of him from his top of his shoulders all the way down to his ankles. It sounds like Jesus is whipping, because remember what Pontius Pilate wants, right? Ecce homo. He wants everybody to say, okay, you've done it. You've tortured the guy. You basically killed him by whipping him practically. We don't have to do anything more. But no, the crowd whips up and says, crucify him. Crucify him, right? They want more. So they want him dead to rights. So essentially, makes sense that they would, that Pontius Pilate would order a whipping, a scourging that goes way, way, way beyond the norm in this particular case. Okay, I'm going to do the hand first, and come back to the contusion on the shoulder. You can see we can see on the left hand. That's the only thing we can see, because Jesus's left hand is covered, or the man on the shroud, official here, is covering his right hand. So and so you can't really see the exit wound on the right hand, but you can see in the left hand the exit wound. And again, this was Bolt and Zugabe and 2 other histopathologists that did a huge number of experiments on this. It started with Pierre Barbet. Pierre Barbet, the great French physical anatomist, he made a mistake. He saw the exit wound coming out of the man's wrist. Right, you see that? Feel that little V area here on your wrist? He could see it coming out there, so he thought, oh, he was crucified through the wrist. He was not crucified through the wrist. Yeah, but what Zugabe and Bolt and those guys discovered is that it's put into the palm right here. It's angled down 13 degrees so that it's going, you feel this little furrow here when you close your hand like this. There's a channel that follows this thenar furrow going down. And so when you put the nail in at that angle and you just let it follow the natural channel, it's going to go right out here. And now the interesting part about this little V place is it's great for holding the hand to the wood of the cross, right? If you put it right through the palm, it would have just torn away in a nanosecond, right? But if you get it coming out here, those bones are strong, hold it. But the other thing that the Romans, a merciless bunch if ever there was one, nothing against Romans today, but they knew that there was a whole complex of nerves right here. And of course, every time the man is pulling himself up to breathe, he is getting like electrically shocked, essentially, every single time. He is being tortured every time he tries to breathe. And so, again, does this correspond to Jesus' crucifixion? Well, I mean, it obviously, Jesus was nailed to the cross. And I'd say about 40% of the time, for extreme criminals, they did the old nailing rather than, a lot of them tied the people up to the cross. But the nailing was to really make the torture, quote unquote, exquisite. In other words, to make it really a torture that you never forget, as it were. So again, it sounds like Jesus. It's not unique to Jesus, but it certainly follows the same pattern. Then we have one other set of data from the Shroud that we don't see in the scripture at all. But since the time of St. Francis of Assisi and the Franciscan mystics, I mean, they are Franciscan, but they're okay. I mean, that's Jesuit too. But since the Franciscan mystics definitely, you can write in the Stations of the Cross, right? We see that Jesus fell. Jesus fell. This man on the shroud definitely fell. And even though we don't see it in Scripture, we see it though in the mystics that talk about the Stations of the Cross. This man, remember, he's lost all this blood. And so he's very, very weak when he's moving toward the cross. He's got this big, heavy, it's either the crossbeam of the cross or the cross itself that is on his right shoulder. You can see he suddenly trips. He lurches forward and bam, he falls to his knees straight down. You can see abrasions all down the knees, right? So the guy definitely made a hard fall on a very rough surface. And the cross, because he's going down and it takes a split second for the momentum to reverse on the cross that was on his shoulders, right? Wham! It just comes right down onto his shoulder. And when it comes down onto his shoulder, you can see the 11-degree, right? So there's an 11-degree slope on the shoulder, and you can, obviously his shoulder got dislocated. Didn't break, but it got dislocated. That 11 degrees is a pretty good marker of that. But more than that, also, you can see a big, huge contusion in the middle of the shoulder. In other words, this guy had blunt force trauma. I mean, this thing just slammed down on him so hard, it just created this mega welt, on his shoulder, and it's producing this kind of big, blood bubble, burst artery bubble that's coming up into the contusion area. The man's head jerked to the left, you can see it, and his right eye gets pulled into its orbit. You can see it all, exactly as anatomically predicted. You can see it all on the shroud. This guy, by the time that fall happens, why do they have to get Simon of Cyrene onto the scene, and get him to carry the cross behind Jesus, as we heard tonight? Why? Because Jesus has lost a lot of blood. Now Jesus has partial paralysis on the right side, from the dislocation of the shoulder and from, the blunt force trauma of the cross falling on it. By the time he's done, that man is incapable of carrying that cross 1 inch further. Believe you me, the Romans never alleviated suffering needlessly. They didn't have a choice. They weren't going to get that cross up there with that man because he was partially paralyzed on the right side. He was too weak. He lost a lot of blood. It was enough for him to get up to Calvary. That was about it. So again, is all this there writ large on the shroud and the bloodstains over against the image? Yes, it is. I think it's reasonable, more than enough evidence for reasonable and responsible belief. This is the unique crucifixion of Jesus. Again, an anatomically perfect picture, and you can see that it's writ large right there in the shroud. And I look at it as saying, if you ever had any doubts about the gospel writers trying to be dead on accurate, well, don't have them anymore. The shroud actually is saying, well, they're right. These descriptions are right on. And the mystics were right on too. Don't ask me how they knew this, except I think they were obviously inspired by God. And it's certainly not evident in Scripture. Everybody okay with kind of the words of Jesus? It's kind of, if you go to magicenter.com, you can get these details of the crucifixion. Just go to one of the videos or one of the articles called "Science in the Shroud of Turin," and you can see these details pretty nicely. If you want to do like a Holy Writ meditation, you can see it there. Okay, let's zoom over now to the resurrection, to the image on the shroud, the evidence of the resurrection, and the explanation for the obvious systematic error in the carbon-14 date. First, there are six unusual aspects of the. Oh, I forgot 2 things about the blood. But, if I might just go back there for 1 second. First thing is that you have a mixture of creatinine and ferritin. These are 2 enzymes in blood that only appear prolifically and synthesized when a person is undergoing a heavy polytrauma. So, Mike, I don't know if you want to read the one study thing there. I kind of have to zoom back. But you can tell from the 372 blood stains, from the synthesis of these two unique enzymes, by the way, which medieval forgers did not know about. You can see that this person in the shroud went through an torture, an exceedingly strong, heavy blood trauma.
This is not a situation typical of a blood storm in healthy human body. High levels of creatinine in the blood are observed in the case of strong trauma. There is a wide recent literature reporting on interaction between creatinine and ferritin in fatal accidents or as a consequence of the rhabdomyolysis due to torture. This result cannot be impressed on the Turin shroud by using ancient diagrams, as they have bigger sizes and tend to aggregate, and it is highly unlikely that the eventual ancient artist would have painted a fake by using the hemanic serum of someone after a heavy polytron.
In other words, how in the world would an artist in the Middle Ages try to create a fake know about the hemanic serum of a heavy polytrauma, indicated by two enzymes that would have never become apparent until you had extremely strong light microscopy. Now, enough said. I think it's pretty clear. Forger deal doesn't seem right. Okay, let's zoom over now to the image. Oh, and one other thing. Guess how the blood is organized? You can see that there's a serum separation from blood plasma along all those wounds, those blood stains. There is serum separation on the vertical axis. In other words, the guy was hanging for a long time on the vertical axis, and when and the serum was separating from the plasma along the vertical axis. We see in some other places we can see some serum separation, on the lateral axis, but basically the vertical axis is definitely the majority one, and the vertical axis, those would be like big gushing wounds that would have produced that. 10 minutes? Oh, give me 15. Okay. All right. Let me just get to the resurrection of the image. So, as I said, 6 unique aspects of the image. Number 1, you can see that the image is lying on the uppermost surface of the fibers. It never penetrates to the middle of the fibers or to the middle of the cloth. Now, obviously, if that's the case, there's just no way paint could have done. Paint, like a liquid, would have gone right into the center of the fibers, center of the cloth. Vapors definitely would have gone, and of course vapors are very blurry, so they would have gone into the adjacent threads and everything else, causing not a perfectly precise three-dimensional photographic negative image, but a very blurry photographic negative image at the end of the day. So again, it's not vapors, is it powders? No, it's not powders. And by the way, no substance, there's no trace substances at all for the image production. So, that's down to number 4 there. But the main thing to remember is no substance was used to produce this image. The image is embedded in the uppermost surface of the fibers of the cloth, and it's embedded there, as we'll see in a moment, from radiation. It never penetrates to, it can't be a liquid, can't be a dye, can't be a vapor, can't be a scorch, obviously it's very clearly indicated by fluorescing, etc. So we're very sure that there's only one explanation left that we'll talk about, and that's radiation. As I go through each of these 5 unique things, radiation, radiation, radiation. You're going to see it again and again and again. Let's go to what's the number 2 thing there? So I think I listed as number 2 yeah.
How does particle radiation work?
Oh no, I'm sorry. So I'll just go through them in my order, and if I get the wrong order, I'm sorry. Okay, there's a whole bunch of places on the cloth a whole bunch of places on the image where the cloth never touched the body. All right, so around inside the eye sockets, along the sides of the hand, along the sides of the body, all of these places, right? You can see that there's just, imaging, certainly from the inside of the body, the backbone. There are places where, you know, the cloth did not make contact with the body or the backbone in the body or whatever. So you can see very clearly there's dozens and dozens and dozens of places where you have imaging without body contact. Those of you who study physics, what do you call action at a distance? Radiation. It's the only thing left. If it's not a liquid or a dye, if it's getting imaging without making contact with the body, then you have action at a distance, and action at a distance is just another way of saying radiation. So we've got some form of radiation that's causing this. Let's go to the third area. That's a unique area of the unique than the image production, and that is no substance whatsoever was used. No powders, no dyes, no rubs. You can't see any trace substances on the shroud. The image is intrinsic to the cloth itself. It is not produced by an external substance. The next thing that's curious about this is, as I said, it's three-dimensional imaging. So there's something about this imaging. In other words, the imaging is so precise in the depth penetration, right? So there's so many degrees of depth penetration on a very, very microscopic level that it literally is tracing the exact distance between the cloth and whatever is causing the image. And so it's so exact, as a matter of fact, it's like an MRI, right? It's like a magnetic resonance imaging. And you could take a VPA digital analyzer, image analyzer from NASA. You can feed a very refined picture of the Shroud of Turin into that digital analyzer. If you took the picture, especially of the photographic negative, that will produce a nice, and has been done, a nice three-dimensional statue of the man who is in the shroud. So you can see even the size of his nose. You can see, the exact distance between, the various parts of the body and the cloth. You can see, even what his backbone looks like, how much muscle and flesh are separating the backbone from the surface, etc. So it's definitely a 3D image, and as I've already said a million times, you have imaging from the inside of the body as well as the outside of the body. This is the most unique image ever produced in the whole history of images for all time in the world. We just don't have any other images that have inside the body imaging. We don't have other images that are three-dimensional except MRI images, and they certainly didn't have one of those in the Middle Ages. And of course, we certainly don't have images that are literally laying on the uppermost surface of the flagels, never penetrating to the middle of the cloth or the middle of the flag.
Well, number two is that it's on the non-photographic.
Oh yeah. So and of course it's emblazoned on a non-photographically sensitive linen cloth. So you're going to have some form of radiation that's going to do this to linen. Not that will do it to a sensitive photographic plate, but to do it to non-photographically sensitive linen. Okay, so all those things put together, you've got yourself a real, what did Churchill say, enigma wrapped in a conundrum or something like that. And of course, there's you're just going to have to take my word for it. There are 45 enigmas on this cloth, 45 of them, and every last one of them is explained by one form of radiation, particle radiation. So, particle radiation will enable imaging from the inside of the body. Because remember, right, first of all, what is particle radiation and what does that theory say? What that theory says is that the body, the whole body of the man in the shroud, is going to start undergoing low temperature nuclear reaction throughout the whole body. And as it starts going through that low temperature nuclear reaction, you're going to have what's called nuclear decay. As this nuclear decay occurs, particles are going to be released from the body uniformly. So they're going to, because this is all happening simultaneously. So you literally have this simultaneous occurrence of low temperature nuclear reactions causing nuclear decay across the entire body simultaneously. And then you're going to have two fluences of particles. One fluence of particles is going to be protons and deuterons, right? Those are positively charged heavy particles. So positively charged heavy particles are going to interact with the negatively charged and other particles in the cloth. So those heavy charged particles, they zoom up to the very uppermost surface of the fibrils, and then with a very precise mathematical formula, they are stopped. But when they're stopped, they literally etch a little teeny, super refined depth image into that cloth. So in other words, it turns the cloth crispy, right, friable. So it's, but it does it so precisely that it's causing a three-dimensional image just in the depth differentials, from one part of the image to the next. So you can almost measure it with pinpoint accuracy how deep, the three-dimensional image, how precise that three-dimensional image is, how close the cloth is to the body, and even how far away the backbone is from the cloth itself. It's all perfectly recorded in 3D in these depth penetrations. Once the cloth has this etching in it, the etching turns to a straw-like coloration. And by the way, Dr. Kitty Little at Harwell Labs in Great Britain, and Nuclear Labs at Great Britain, and Jean-Baptiste Renaudot over in the Grenoble Institut Physique in France, and then Dr. Arthur Lynn here in the United States. The three of them have tested this again and again in low temperature nuclear reactions in various reactors around the world. All of them get the same friability, the same depth precision of penetration, and also the same straw-like coloration that comes in its wake. So it looks, and by the way, these tests were done with cloths with the same spectral reflectance as the Shroud. So, I mean, it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, probably a duck. So the idea is pretty clearly, this seems to be a very good explanation of the image. The other thing with particle, like heavy charged particles, is they will take away the fluorescing quality of all the imaged areas. So you should find no normally a linen cloth will fluoresce. Fluorescing just means you shine a fluorescent light on it. The reflection of the fluorescent light, reflecting off the linen, should come back at a fairly high intensity. But in the image areas, it will not come back with any intensity, right? So all the fluorescing qualities will be taken away by that etched image. Okay, so that's one of the fluences that happens, and you can see practically all the image enigmas are there. It stops at the uppermost surface of the fibril here. It's definitely radiation, so action at a distance is clearly there. And you can think about, how did the imaging from the inside of the body get there? Clearly, the particles that were in the skin and the muscles, they of course are decaying at the same time that the particles in the backbone are decaying, but they cleared the way, right? So they go and they start flowing off the body, because the ones from the backbone have to travel a slight distance from the backbone to the muscle and to the skin. But now there's no muscle or skin there because those were already decayed and they already flowed off. So this thing, which is only a split second behind those, the path is clear. The backbone image can go right up and hit the cloth with a very accurate depth indication. You guys hanging in?
Yeah.
So basically all your image enigmas are going to be there. Now we've got another set of enigmas that are not necessarily image enigmas. Here, these are all explained by what's called a neutron fluence. So it's not just charged particles, heavy charged particles like protons and deuterons. It's heavy uncharged particles like neutrons, right? So the neutrons, they don't stop at the uppermost surface of the body. They don't interact with anything because they've got high momentum and they have no charge. So they go zooming right through the cloth. And when they go through the cloth, they're going to have three effects. The first effect it's going to have is when they go through the cloth, it'll break down all the linear carbonyl bondings in the linen cloth. So that's the first thing to take note of. So when it breaks down those linear carbon bonds, what interestingly happens in cellulose is that it reconstitutes those weak linear bonds with very much stronger crystalline carbonyl bonds. So this, we always wondered, why does the shroud have so much resiliency? How come it has, so much flexibility? How come it's, it just resists solvents and resists water? I mean, it's the most remarkable kind of cloth. They're all crystalline carbonyl bonds. And by the way, as you examine the shroud, and there they are, a high proliferation of crystalline carbonyl bonds. The second thing, we always wondered why the bloodstains on the shroud were bright red. Those of you who are in healthcare or biology, you leave blood in the open air for just a few days. It goes from bright red to dark red to brown and then to black. So after 2,000 years, all those bloodstains ought to be black, but they're not. They're bright red. Once again, what happened? Neutrons. Remember, neutrons don't stop at the surface of the blood. They go zipping through that blood, and as they go zipping through it at high momentum, they irradiate the blood. So you've got that neutron irradiation, and then when you take neutron irradiated blood and you put it into an exhibition, right? Like that has ultraviolet light, like the sun, like in Turin, right? When the shroud goes on exhibition, there's sun shining all over the place, a lot of ultraviolet light. And you put that, expose the irradiated blood to ultraviolet light, what does it do? It turns every one of those 372 blood stains bright red. So that explains another thing. The third thing that it explains, I'm going to say the carbon fluorescence, is that neutrons actually cause additional fluorescing in the non-imaged sections of the cloth. So where the image isn't, where the protons and deuterons have not been, if you just take the regular linen cloth and you irradiate, just send those neutrons blasting through there in that cloth, what it will do is it will actually intensify the fluorescing reflection. So nearest to the body, we should expect that the fluorescing will be, because you get more neutrons closer to the body, right? So the neutron density is very high close to the body. But as you move away from the body, it gets slightly lower, so less neutron density as you move toward the end of the cloth. You guys hanging in there? Yeah. So you can actually, this guy, Dr. Tom McAvoy, he actually shows, he's got pictures straight across the board, and you can see that as you move away from the body, you can see that there's additional fluorescing, very intense near the body, and as you move away toward the edge, you can see that it gets less and less and less and less. And you look at that and you go, is there any way of calculating it? As a matter of fact, there is. There's a software called Monte Carlo N-particle software. This software makes, and by the way, it's peer reviewed and it's used by the Atomic Energy Commission. And this is a really important thing. You've got to have the N-particle software really correct, because you don't want a lot of excess high momentum neutrons bouncing around, because that's dangerous. So the main thing is you've got to be very sure what your neutron densities are going to be. So the Monte Carlo N-particle software predicts the exact amount of fluorescing that would correspond. So McAvoy did all this. Corresponds to high, super high fluorescing here, and then, the exact amounts of shadings downward as you move toward the edge of the shroud, and, on all sides of the shroud, right? And of course, that fluorescing corresponds exactly to what Monte Carlo predicts will be the neutron density across the shroud. Again, neutrons everywhere to be found. Whew, finally, we're at the carbon dating. Now, remember there's a carbon fluence. It's gotta be the explanation. So essentially what's happening, just to give you a summary, right? So as this body starts undergoing low temperature nuclear radiation across the whole body, right? And this is causing the nuclear decay, which is causing the fluence of proton deuterons and the fluence of the neutrons coming from it, right? What you would see is this in a split second. An exceedingly bright light followed by a boom, not followed by, at the same time a boom with the bright light, at the same time a proton deuteron fluence, and at the same time a neutron fluence that are coming right across the body all at the same time. By the way, do you know the odds against having a low temperature, a nuclear reaction causing causing atomic decay across the entire body of a man simultaneously? It's about the same odds as a monkey typing the first two scenes of Macbeth by random tapping of the keys perfectly in a single try. It's a miracle. If that happened, I'm telling you, that wasn't done naturalistically. And there's no way, according to contemporary atomic theory, to possibly explain this happening naturalistically. There's something akin to a miracle that is going on here. The hand of God's got to be in this one. But that, as an aside, I think supernatural causation is going to be required. But I think this is also a correct hypothesis. I'll get to a confirmation of the hypothesis in just a moment. But for the moment, remember this formula that I said at the beginning. Carbon-14 plus a neutron. So remember, you've got these neutrons and they're flowing out of their high momentum, right? They're zooming off, and the neutron density, right, is as you move further and further away from the body, the neutron density is getting less and less the further away from the body it is. The closer to the body, very high neutron density. Remember, carbon-14 plus a neutron yields C14, carbon-14, plus a proton. Now that carbon-14, it's embedded in the cloth. Remember that, by the way, what's a linen cloth made of? Cellulose. What cellulose constituted by main ingredient? Nitrogen-13, the regular element nitrogen. But there is a lot of N14 that accompanies N13 in a linen cloth. That's the isotope, the N14, nitrogen-14 isotope. That N14 isotope has been proven again and again and again. You put an extra neutron in that baby, you're going to get C14. Now, if you start loading that cloth up with C14, what is that going to do to a C14 dating test? It's going to push the date forward, right, and more forward and more forward. So the closer to the body you are, the baseline is probably about 8 inches from the body. That date should measure 0. In other words, that happened today. So that's what it would show. It would show that that part of the cloth has enough C14 that it just happened today or yesterday. But as you go further away from 8 inches, so you go 9, 10, 11, 12 inches away from where the body lay, you can see that, of course, it'll go a little bit more back into the past, a little bit more back into the past. Let's now take our 8 centimeter sample that's taken by the foot area near the edge of the cloth. What does Monte Carlo end particle software predict for that area? It predicts that you, in that area, it's the furthest away on the shroud you can get, basically, from the body. What would you predict that it is, Monte Carlo says, you should get around a 1260 measurement. So that Shroud originated in 1260 from the amount of carbon-14, but it's the variance. That's the killer. Monte Carlo predicts the same 250-year variance in that little spot. In other words, 31 years per centimeter. So you closest to the body, 1410. That's really close to what Monte Carlo would predict for the neutron density at that point. So, right, it's kind of like almost, a whole foot and a half away from the body. And then as you keep moving 1 inch more, you're going to get 91 less years of age, and you get out to the edge, and you should get something along the lines of 1150. That's just what the carbon dating says, between 1410 and 1150, based on the neutron density. Right? You can actually tell that that's what the carbon dating would have predicted, based on the amount of C14 embedded in the cloth, all that extra C14. Did I just go over everybody's head? Are you hanging in? Okay. So in other words, what are the odds that the carbon-14 would predict? Now, getting back to that face cloth of Oviedo, one last thing, and I'll wind it up with a summary. That face cloth of Oviedo, the carbon dating was 780. Now go back. You've got this big limestone tomb, right? And in the limestone tomb, you walk in the entrance and you go toward the back of the tomb, and there's a big ledge there where the body is put in the back of the tomb. And the head's on the right as you're facing the body, right? You're facing the end of the tomb. The head's on the right, the body, the feet are to the left. Then, if you go, this is a typical limestone tomb. You go just a little bit to the right, and you'll see a ledge at the same level as the slab that the body is lying on. And so there's this kind of extra ledge that's off to the side of the slab. So you've got the slab, you've got a space of about 6 inches, and then you have this ledge. Imagine that you are one of the women. You've taken the body down, you remove the face cloth that we call the face cloth of Oviedo. You remove it from the face. Then you take that face cloth and you put it right there. It's conveniently close, right? 5-6 inches away. You just throw it right on that ledge, rolled up in a place by itself, and then put the body, into the shroud, and you just pull the shroud over the top of the man's head and close it at the feet. Now, what does Monte Carlo and particle software predict that the neutron density will be? Not just, remember, we're going 6 inches more away from the furthest edge of the shroud. It predicts an age. Remember, those 6 inches, you're going to go from 1150 to 700. This is the exact dating of the carbon dating of the face cloth of Oviedo, 700 AD. And it follows right there the neutron density that would have been coming from the man's body. That neutron density would be sufficient to produce enough extra carbon in the cloth instead of 0.80. So when you subtract all of the Monte Carlo predictions for neutron density, when you subtract all the effects that it would have on C14 in the cloth, what does the cloth turn out to be? What does the shroud turn out to be? About 0.80. Pretty close to about 0.80. And what does it predict that the face cloth of Oviedo would be if you subtracted out the extra carbon-14 from the neutron density that's in that cloth furthest away? 0.80. In other words, we're really close to the mid-1st century. And so all I can tell you is things are really adding up. And I'll bet you there's 2 confirmations, and I'll just wind it up. There are 2 confirmations coming out here. The first one is, you just wait until the next exhibition. All those physicists are going to be hunting on that cloth for 2 things. The first thing they'll be looking for is cosmogenic isotopes. So they'll be looking for chlorine-36 and calcium-41. Why? Because these are cosmogenic isotopes that happen in very close proximity to nuclear reactions or in sort of like cosmic events like the supernova or something like that. So if they find an abundance of chlorine-36 or calcium-41 embedded in that cloth, know this. There was a low temperature nuclear reaction happening in that body that was producing nuclear decay. And that would definitely explain the neutron and proton deuteron collisions. Second thing they're going to be looking for. Remember, it's not just in that 8 centimeter piece that you're going to get age ranges. So in other words, if you go 8 inches away from the cloth, there's going to be so much extra C14 there. It'll say that whole area that's 8 inches away, that was made yesterday. Then as you go further and further toward the body, 7 inches away from the body, 6 inches away from the body, you go closer and closer to the body, guess what's going to happen? You're going to go into the future. The C14 dating test will say, well, there's so much C14 here, and then as you get right next to the body, the C14 measurement should be 2,000 years into the future. There will be such a superabundance of carbon-14, it'll go right past the base value. Base value is at 8 inches. That's yesterday, you know. And then, of course, you keep getting close to that body, you're going to have so much neutron density, you're going to have so much C14. They'll measure 2,000. If we see this in the clock, know this, ladies and gentlemen. You are looking right at a most remarkable, miraculous event. The entire body begins to undergo a low temperature nuclear reaction. It's almost as if God is intentionally, in the transformation of the physical body into Jesus' spiritual body, God is allowing the particles that once constituted that body now to be embedded in the cloth to cause its image, and then of course to solidify the longevity of that cloth, with the crystalline carbonyl body, turning the blood bright red. It's almost as if God's got this incredible plan to put this whole thing together. And for a split second there, what you're going to see is a bright light, a boom, a fluence of proton neurons, a fluence of neutrons, and it's just this big, huge step in the conversion of the physical body to the spiritual body, leaving behind remnants of the physical body, not just in terms of blood, but in terms of the actual particles that constitute the image itself, and those neutrons that will be brightening up the blood and strengthening the cloth. And all these things are going to be done in the twinkling of an eye. And all I can say is, if that's what really happened, it's a miracle. And not only is it a miracle, but naturalistically inexplicable. But the bright light, the boom, everything is an announcement that He is risen as He promised. With all of this in mind, know that God I think He planned this out 2,000 years ago. That 2,000 years later, it's going to be a skeptical scientific generation. And they're going to be pouring through this thing, and they're going to go, wow. Coincidences are overwhelming. And God would wink and go, watch. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a really happy Holy Week.